Hello and welcome everybody back to the Wasteland. Welcome back to Fallout 1, where today we're going to be going over the traits for Fallout 1 and 2 because they're all kind of the same. There's like a few exceptions and few of them do change, but we're going to be talking about each of these, and we already have them set up here in our tier list. So let's go through them, starting out at the bottom, and then we'll work our way up. So at the very bottom, I put Skilled. Skilled is a trait that gives you 10% more skills to everything at the start of the game, but it gives you -1 to your perk rate. So usually you would get a perk at every 3 levels in Fallout 1 and 2. At this, you would get a perk at every 4 levels. So you are missing out on perks, and perks are very impactful in these early games. That's generally a bad thing. This one is better in Fallout 1 than it is in Fallout 2, because in Fallout 1, 10% more is kind of useful, and generally you're not going to be going above like level 15 or 16 to actually beat the game. So in that regard, you're not actually missing out on very much. In Fallout 2, this one's worse because this one gives you not +10 to all of your skills, but +5 more skill points every time you level up, which is a little bit better, but you're probably going to be getting to a higher level in Fallout 2 than you are in Fallout 1 because there's a whole lot more to do in that game. So it's less useful in that one just because of that, even though arguably it's better overall. It's just that this gets worse and worse the more you scale up. Our next D tier option is Kamikaze. Kamikaze in Fallout 1 and 2 gives you 5 more sequence, which is pretty much just, can you go first? If you have higher sequence than the enemy, then you get to go first during a fight or during any encounter. But it sets your armor class at 0. Armor class is the chance that you have to dodge attacks, and this is only affecting the base chance of dodge. So if you have armor, then this isn't affecting it. This one, like the sequence is really like the downside to this one, because the sequence just doesn't really matter unless you have low agility, in which case then it can be kind of okay, but it still likely doesn't matter. And if you have high agility, which you probably are going to have high agility thanks to that counting your action points, this one is just a downside. Most of the time you're just going to get hit more often than you otherwise would. Dodging may not actually matter all that much throughout the game, but it does help in the early game. So it's just going to make the early game that much more difficult for you. And then our last D tier trait is Chem Reliant. Chem Reliant makes it so that you recover twice as fast from chems if you get addicted to them, but it makes it so chems are more likely to be addictive towards you. You don't really need to be using chems, and this doesn't really help, because the withdrawal effects aren't too bad, and if you're not using chems that often, if you're using them every once in a while, there's a very low chance that you're going to become addicted to them, and this is actually going to hurt you in like any real way, because if you're taking the chems, you're probably in a combat situation and you just need them to do a little bit more damage or for you to take less damage, and that is pretty useful. If you aren't in those situations, then you're just kind of popping chems maybe accidentally, in which case then being addicted to them doesn't really matter, and it might hurt you a little bit more. It's just not really that great. Moving on to our C tiers, we have Night Person. Night Person gives you +1 intelligence, +1 perception between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., and then it gives you -1 perception and -1 intelligence if it's daytime. So if you're playing the game normally, then this one is generally going to go kind of neutral. +1 intelligence and +1 perception doesn't matter too much. Perception is good for actually making ranged shots. Intelligence can be a little bit useful for certain things like talking to people and getting more skill points for certain skills, but that's about it. So it doesn't give you that much of a bonus, even if you're just strictly playing this only at night where you would get the bonus. And then we have Jinxed. Jinxed makes it so that you are more likely to suffer from critical failures, but so are enemies. So critical failures can include anything from like accidentally breaking your limbs, going blind, dropping your gun, hurting yourself when attacking an enemy, and this works both ways. The higher the luck you have, the more chance that this has to not happen to you. So, you know, the higher luck you have, less likely you are to accidentally do any of these things. Lower luck you have, the more likely these things are to happen. This one can actually be a really fun trait to be taking, but you should probably be taking it on like your second or third playthrough or something like that of these games, where you can actually kind of enjoy this, because I can imagine this being really annoying if this is your first time trying to play it and you're just constantly like dropping your gun, hurting yourself, breaking your limbs, and then like that's it, that's your turn. You gotta wait, and then the enemies can do the same thing to you, and you're hoping that they also have critical failures, which can be kind of funny if that does actually happen. It's funny when somebody punches you, hurts themselves, and knocks themselves on the ground. Then we have Sex Appeal. Sex Appeal is only in Fallout 2, it's not in Fallout 1 or in Tactics, and this one took the place of Good Natured. Sex Appeal makes it so you get more favorable reactions towards the opposite sex, but less favorable actions towards the same sex. This can be kind of useful. It's similar to like Black Widow or Lady Killer in the later games, where it does get you some more value in certain quests, but for the most part, it's kind of neutral if you want to be taking it. It's nothing way crazy either way, so kind of useful in certain situations, but more for like a themed character build. And then the last one we have in C tier is Bloody Mess. Bloody Mess actually doesn't come with any real downsides other than changing the ending to Fallout 1. Bloody Mess makes it so that there's just more violent animations than there otherwise would be. And that's it. There's no real downside to this, and the upside is pretty minimal. You don't get any more damage or anything like that. So it's just kind of a neutral trait for you to take. If you want to take it, go for it. If you don't need to, then there's no reason to. Moving up to the B tier perks of ones that can actually be kind of useful, we have Fast Metabolism. Fast Metabolism gives you +2 more to your healing rate, but it gives you 0 to your poison resist and 0 to your radiation resist. This one can be kind of useful because you can wait in these games to get all of your healing back, which is kind of useful, and this one just makes it that much better. It just heals you up quicker. 0 poison resist can kind of suck in the early game of Fallout 1 and 2, though, because like rad scorpions can be a problem, and getting poisoned is a little bit annoying. It's usually not like life-threatening or anything, but it does make it so you're just taking more damage over time, and your healing is somewhat making up for that, which is kind of nice. Radiation honestly doesn't matter that much in these games, because in Fallout 1 there's like one area that actually has radiation, and that's it. So if you have Radix and Radaway, you don't really need that. Sort of the same thing in Fallout 2. There's a couple more places that have radiation and a few more ways you can get irradiated, but even so, it's still not that big of a deal. Then we've got Bruiser. Bruiser gives you +2 strength, which is quite good, but it gives you -2 action points, which is quite bad. This one's much better on like a melee or unarmed build, and even then it's kind of questionable as to how good this one is. It's good early on, especially if you want to go with a low strength build and hit this so that you can use certain weapons. That's kind of useful, especially if you're going with high agility, so you can make up for the fact that you're losing a couple action points, which is kind of a big deal. It's just that you can also get like power armor and the advanced power armor in the old Fallout games, and they give you +2 and +3 strength, which is kind of just better. I mean, you can usually max out your strength without too much trouble if you're just going with regular amounts of strength. So Bruiser can be kind of useful in specific builds, but generally not the best on a lot of builds. Then we've got Finesse. Finesse gives you 10% more crit chance, but it gives you -30% more damage overall. This way it kind of evens out whenever you're hitting crits, where you will do more damage thanks to the crit, but you are still relying on getting crits for you to actually get more damage. And that's generally just not that great, because early on you're probably just going to be using up more bullets than you otherwise would be, or more attacks than you otherwise would be if you're using this with like melee and unarmed. It's not going to be as useful. When you do roll those crits, you will be getting quite a bit more damage, which is nice, but this is best if you take this, have high luck, and then plan on taking all of the luck-based perks, like you want to take more crits and better crits so that you can at least go up to a higher crit chance. I think at max crit chance, you have, at least not counting some of the perks like Sniper, which is bugged in Fallout 2, and like Slayer, which just gives you guaranteed crits, which also makes this one quite a bit worse for unarmed and melee. I think the max you can get is like 10 from this, 10 from luck, so you're going up to 20, and then 15 from better crits if you take it 3 times. So you go up to 35% crit chance, but you're getting -30% damage overall. So I've tried this a couple of times and it feels more like a trade-off than anything. Can be kind of useful towards the mid game, and then it's not that great towards the early game and not that great towards the late game. So it has like a specific niche. I usually don't take it too often, but it's okay. This is Fast Metabolism. So Fast Metabolism I did put up higher. I was wondering why it was kind of low. This is actually Chem Resistant that I put down here. My bad. They just look very similar. Chem Resistant makes it so you're half as likely to get addicted to chems, which is pretty good, but it makes it so all chems last half as long. That's actually not that big of a deal, because you're likely popping chems when you're in the middle of combat or about to get into combat. So the chem should last the whole combat duration. You won't really have to worry about that too much, and that is a big bonus. And not getting addicted is kind of nice. So generally this one's more of a pro than it is a con, but it's not a massive pro, so that's why I put it here. Everything that I said about Fast Metabolism, just apply it to this one and move it up a little bit. I got those two mixed up. They look fairly similar to me. Moving on to the A tier perks, we've got these, and I kind of moved them around a little bit because I don't think they were quite in the right order. First up, we got One-Handed. One-Handed makes it so that you have 20% more hit chance with one-handed weapons, but minus 40% hit chance with two-handed weapons. This one is pretty good if you want to go with a dedicated one-handed weapon build, but you are locking yourself into that, because then two-handed weapons are substantially weaker than they otherwise would be. So if you like using big guns, most energy weapons, rifles, things like that, you're not going to be able to use them. This is still fairly strong though, because there's a lot of good one-handed weapons that you can get throughout Fallout 1 and 2 early on, like the 10mm pistol, 10mm submachine gun, you get the 223 pistol. If you have very high luck, there's a really good chance that you run into the alien encounter and you get the alien blaster, and that's one of the best weapons in the game. There's also like the Gauss pistol in Fallout 2, so you do have pretty good options. Up next we have Good Natured, and Good Natured gives you plus 15% more skills towards your first aid, doctor, speech, and barter, but it gives you minus 10% to your small guns, big guns, energy weapons, throwing, melee weapons, and unarmed. This isn't such a big deal because you're likely not going to be building up all of these combat stats, and you might be wanting to have all of these passive stats. It's not as useful as it would become in like Fallout Tactics, but it's still generally more of a bonus than it is a con, because you're probably only going to go with like 1 or 2 main combat styles, and losing out on 10% early on just doesn't really matter. You can max those out pretty quickly, especially if you tagged them. That's only 5 skill points per each, and you're getting up to potentially 15 skill points for the other 4 skills. Then we have Small Frame. Small Frame gives you plus 1 agility, but minus 25 carry weight. That's just pretty good overall on most builds. You don't really need to have high carry weight, even less so if you want to be taking companions, because you can just offload your gear onto them. You don't need to be carrying around a whole lot of gear in these first games anyway. Kind of keep what you really want to be using. So things like your main weapon, your armor, and bullets, and then healing, and that's basically it. Everything else that's not a quest item you don't really need to be picking up. So Small Frame is actually pretty good. Pretty straightforward too. Then we got Heavy Handed. Heavy Handed makes it so you do 4 more base damage with melee and unarmed, which is quite a lot. That's pretty substantial, considering that's better than a lot of unarmed or melee weapons actually have in terms of just damage, so adding to them is pretty nice. The downside to this one though is that you get minus 30% crit hit rates, which makes it so crits are less likely to be appearing overall. That's not such a big deal though if you manage to get up high level, because if you get Slayer, then you have guaranteed crits with unarmed and melee. So that is really, really good. And it makes it so melee and unarmed have a really easy time in the early game and in the mid game. And then by the time you get into late game, where they would get kind of a downside from this, you can get like Slayer, and then you just still have even more upsides to it. So Heavy Handed is actually quite strong on those builds. And then moving up to our very top S tier traits, we have Fast Shot. Fast Shot is insanely good. This one makes it so you can't use aim shots anymore. So you can't aim for like the head or the eyes or anything like that. But it does make it so all of your attacks, including unarmed and melee too, cost 1 less action point for you to use, which is insane with unarmed weapons, especially like the Power Fist, because the Power Fist costs 3, with this it would cost 2, and then you can also get bonus hand-to-hand attacks, which cost 1. So you use 1 action point for every single attack, meaning that if you got 10 action points, you can attack 10 times before you need to stop with the Power Fist, which is pretty crazy. Like, Fast Shot is insanely strong. It's really good in Fallout 2 as well, especially for big guns like the Bowser that can only be fired in burst. Burst don't have aim shots, so this is just a bonus to them. Fast Shot is just generally really strong. And then the top of our S tier goes to Gifted. Gifted is pretty crazy. Gifted makes it so you get +1 to all of your special stats at the start, which is really good. +7 special stats is kind of insane, at the cost of giving you minus 10% to all of your skills at the start, which isn't that big of a deal, and then minus 5 skill points every time that you level up. That one's going to hit the hardest, but honestly it doesn't really hit that bad, because after a level or two, you've probably upgraded whatever skill you wanted to level up, and this just makes it so much easier to get whatever perks you're going for. It just makes it so this one fits into just about every build. So Gifted is going to be basically never a bad option. It's generally going to be a really good option, unless you're going to go with something like Fast Shot and Heavy Handed for an unarmed build that you want to max out early on or something. And even then, Gifted would still be a good choice over either one of those if you wanted. I'd probably take it over Heavy Handed. But yeah, still very, very strong. So Gifted is really good. It's probably the best trait in these older games. And that's where I'd put all the traits in Fallout 1 and 2. Tell me your thoughts on these. This isn't for Tactics. I'll probably do a different video for Tactics, because some of these traits did actually change quite a bit. Like Kamikaze got way better. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.